A Ferrari worth $4.8 million sat in the center of the workshop. It was the kind of car that existed beyond transportation, beyond luxury, beyond practicality. Collectors flew across continents to see cars like this in person. Today, it would not start. The diagnostics had been running for 43 hours. Ferrari's own technical division was involved. 3 senior specialists had flown in from Italy. A team of engineers had tested every system they could access. Nothing worked. The fault remained. The CEO who owned the workshop stood beside the Ferrari and watched another failed startup attempt. The engine turned. The systems responded. The car refused to come alive. The room was running out of ideas. And running out of time. A collector event was scheduled for that evening. Clients were arriving in less than 6 hours. The Ferrari was supposed to be the centerpiece. Instead, it was becoming an embarrassment. Then the side door opened. A man carrying a parts delivery box stepped into the workshop. Nobody paid attention to him. Not at first. He walked past the service bays, past the engineers, past the diagnostic station. Then he stopped beside the Ferrari. He looked at it for several seconds, not the way people usually looked at rare cars, not with admiration, not with excitement, with recognition, like somebody seeing something familiar. His hand rested lightly on the engine cover. That was when the CEO saw him. The reaction was immediate. In front of technicians, in front of clients, in front of everyone in the workshop. She ordered him away from the car. Then she told him to leave. Immediately, the delivery driver looked at her. Then he looked back at the Ferrari and quietly said something that made several people laugh. Because nobody in the room believed it. He said he was the man who invented the engine inside it. 5 minutes later, Ferrari headquarters called. 10 minutes later, the workshop was silent. And 20 minutes later, the CEO realized she had just thrown out the only person in the building who could fix the car. Before I tell you how that happened, drop your city in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you enjoy stories about hidden expertise, impossible problems, and the moments that change everything, subscribe right now. We publish a brand new story every week. Now let me take you back. Not to the Ferrari. Not to the workshop, but 15 years earlier to a test facility in northern Italy. And to the engineer who solved a problem nobody else could solve. Ethan Parker woke at 5:32 without an alarm. The habit had survived careers, countries, success, failure, and grief. Some routines became so deeply integrated into a person's life that they no longer required effort. They simply happened. Coffee, first, then breakfast. His daughter Emma's oatmeal on the low flame. Vitamins on the small saucer. Orange juice in the short glass she preferred for reasons she had explained once at age 7 and never felt the need to explain again. 2 knocks on her door at 6:15. Emma appeared 9 seconds later. Ethan knew because she appeared in 9 seconds almost every morning. She had her mother's eyes and her father's tendency to treat questions like investigations rather than conversations. She arrived carrying the small notebook she had been filling for the past 3 years and sat across from him at the kitchen table. She opened the notebook before she picked up her spoon. That was normal. Most children ate breakfast. Emma collected information. "Dad," she said. "Deliveries today?" 2, she nodded. "The fancy places?" "One of them." "Which one?" "The Prestige Workshop on Harbour Avenue, the one with the Ferrari in the window?" The same one. She wrote something down. Ethan had stopped asking what she wrote years ago. Experience had taught him that she eventually shared everything she considered important. She simply did it on her own schedule. Emma looked up. "Do they know you're coming?" "They ordered the parts." "That's not what I asked." Ethan smiled. "No, they don't know me specifically." She seemed satisfied with the distinction. A few minutes later, she closed the notebook and looked at him again. "Dad." "Yes? If somebody built something important and nobody knew they built it, does it still matter?" The question arrived without warning. Most of Emma's questions did. Ethan considered it for a moment. Then he answered carefully. "The work matters even when the person doesn't." She studied his face. "Really? Really? What if somebody else gets the credit? The work still exists. What if nobody remembers who made it? The work still exists." She thought about that. Then she wrote something in the notebook. He noticed she underlined it twice. Neither of them spoke for a while after that. They finished breakfast. He packed her lunch. She grabbed her backpack. At 7:25 he drove her to school. Before she got out of the truck, she asked one final question. "Dad." "Yes?" "If you saw somebody making a mistake, and they didn't know they were making it, would you tell them?" "Depends on what. Whether they needed to hear it. What if they didn't want to hear it?" Ethan looked at her. "Especially then." She nodded. The answer went into the notebook. Then she climbed out and disappeared through the school entrance. Ethan watched until she was inside. Then he drove toward the shop. Parker Automotive occupied an old brick building near the edge of town. 3 bays. 1 office. 1 paint-faded sign above the entrance. Nothing about it suggested the man who owned it had once worked on projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Nothing about Ethan Parker suggested it either. That was intentional. The shop had been open for 8 years. In that time, he had built a reputation for doing things correctly rather than impressively. Customers came because repairs stayed fixed. Word traveled. That was enough. Inside Bay 1 sat a locked steel cabinet. Most people assumed it contained tools. Some tools were inside. Other things were there too. Old engineering notebooks, prototype sketches, development reports, photographs from another life, documents that connected Ethan Parker to projects most people only knew through magazine covers and automotive documentaries. He rarely opened the cabinet, not because he disliked the memories, because he no longer needed them. The past had already happened. The work had already been done, and the people who needed to know about it already knew. Or at least that was what he told himself. At 8:15, he loaded the delivery parts into the truck. A routine shipment. Nothing complicated. A collection of specialty components, requested by several local workshops. The final stop was Harbor Avenue, the prestige workshop with the Ferrari in the window. The same Ferrari Emma had noticed months earlier, the same workshop she always pointed at whenever they drove past. Ethan checked the paperwork, started the truck, and headed toward Harbor Avenue. He did not know that before noon he would be standing beside one of the most famous Ferraris ever built. He did not know that a CEO would throw him out of her workshop in front of clients and employees. And he certainly did not know that the engine inside that Ferrari contained an idea he had created 15 years earlier. An idea worth billions. An idea almost nobody knew belonged to him. By the time the morning ended, that was going to change. 15 years earlier, Ethan Parker lived in northern Italy. Not permanently. Engineers in his field rarely lived permanently anywhere. Projects moved. Teams moved. Manufacturers moved. The work dictated the geography. At 31, Ethan was a senior combustion systems engineer assigned to one of the most ambitious performance vehicle programs Ferrari had attempted in a decade. The challenge sounded simple when described in a meeting. It became considerably less simple when engineers tried to build it. Ferrari wanted a new hypercar. Not merely fast, not merely expensive, not merely beautiful. Those things were expected. This car needed to represent the future. The performance of a racing machine. The refinement of a grand tourer. The efficiency of modern hybrid technology and the emotional character that made a Ferrari feel like a Ferrari. The problem was that those objectives frequently worked against one another. Power created heat. Heat reduced efficiency. Efficiency altered power delivery. Hybrid systems introduced complexity. Complexity introduced weight. Every solution seemed to create a new problem. Entire departments spent years trying to balance competing demands that refused to cooperate. The project became one of the most closely guarded engineering programs in the company's history. Publicly, very little information existed. Internally, hundreds of specialists worked on different pieces of the same puzzle. Most of them never saw the entire picture. Ethan was one of the few who did. Not because he was the most senior person, not because he had the highest title, because he possessed a specific talent. He saw relationships between systems. Where other engineers focused on individual components, Ethan focused on interactions. How one decision affected 5 others. How a gain in one area created losses elsewhere. How separate problems sometimes shared the same underlying cause. That perspective eventually led him to the breakthrough that changed the entire project. The issue was combustion stability. The hybrid system could deliver enormous power. The electric motors performed exactly as intended. The problem existed in the transition between electric and combustion operation. At certain load conditions, the engine became unpredictable. Not dangerous, not unreliable, just inconsistent. Small fluctuations. Tiny inefficiencies. The kind of issue ordinary drivers would never notice. The kind of issue Ferrari engineers obsessed over for months. Meetings filled entire afternoons. Reports accumulated. Specialists proposed increasingly complex solutions. Nothing worked. Then Ethan suggested something different. Not a new component. Not a new material. Not a new manufacturing process. A new way for the engine to think. An adaptive combustion architecture capable of continuously modifying ignition and fuel delivery patterns based on real-time operating conditions. The idea sounded impossible, then impractical, then expensive, then unnecessary. The objections arrived in that order. Ethan answered every one. 3 months later, the first prototype ran. 6 months later, the performance numbers exceeded projections. 1 year later, the architecture became the foundation of the production engine. The hypercar launched to enormous attention. Magazine covers, motor shows, collector events, television features, industry awards. The public knew the vehicle. The public knew Ferrari. The public knew the executives who stood beside the car during press conferences. Nobody knew Ethan Parker. That was normal. Most engineers disappeared behind the products they created. The work received the spotlight. The people who built it rarely did. Ethan had never minded. The car existed. The engineering worked. That was enough. Or at least, it had been. Then, life changed. 4 years later, on a Tuesday morning, his phone rang while he was reviewing development data. The call lasted less than a minute. The consequences lasted forever. His wife had been involved in an accident. By the time he reached the hospital, the decisions had already been made. Nothing could be changed. Nothing could be fixed. Nothing could be engineered back into working order. For the first time in his life, Ethan encountered a problem no amount of expertise could solve. He resigned 6 months later. His colleagues assumed he would eventually return. Many people did after enough time passed. Ethan never did. Instead, he moved back to the United States, opened a small repair shop, raised his daughter, built a quieter life. The engineering awards stayed in storage. The project files disappeared into boxes. The Ferrari became part of his past. Years passed. The world continued celebrating the hypercar. Collectors paid astonishing amounts to own one. Auctions broke records. Documentaries praised its engineering. Automotive journalists described the engine as revolutionary. Most of them never mentioned the engineer responsible for the architecture that made it possible. Ethan never corrected them. Because the work still existed. And according to the answer he had given Emma that morning, the work mattered even when the person didn't. At least that was what he believed. What he did not know was that before the day ended, he would find himself standing beside one of those Ferraris again. And this time, somebody was going to ask the wrong question. A question that would change everything. Victoria Sinclair had built Sinclair Automotive Group the same way she built everything else in her life. Deliberately, patiently, without shortcuts. The company had started as a single luxury service facility 12 years earlier. 1 building, 4 technicians, a handful of clients. Now it operated across 3 cities and catered to collectors whose garages contained vehicles most people only saw in magazines. The company's reputation rested on 2 principles: discretion and competence. Clients trusted Sinclair Automotive because problems were solved, fast, correctly, without excuses. Which was why the situation sitting in the center of the workshop on that Tuesday morning was becoming increasingly dangerous. The Ferrari. Rosso Corsa Red. Carbon fiber exposed beneath carefully sculpted bodywork. One of the most celebrated hypercars ever produced. One of the rarest Ferraris on the continent. And currently one of the most expensive paperweights in existence. The problem had started 48 hours earlier. At first it appeared minor, an intermittent startup issue. Nothing unusual. The kind of thing elite technicians handled every day. Then the issue evolved. The car started refusing specific operating sequences. Diagnostic systems began producing conflicting reports. One module blamed another. One sensor contradicted the next. Software updates produced no improvement. Factory diagnostics produced no improvement. The problem remained. Victoria's team had already spent 2 full days on the vehicle. By Tuesday morning, they were joined by Ferrari technical specialists participating remotely from Italy. 3 engineers, 2 software experts, a senior systems consultant. None of them had an answer. The vehicle's diagnostic data suggested 3 possible failures. Each explanation contradicted the others. Every test eliminated 1 possibility while creating 2 more. The Ferrari sat beneath workshop lighting, surrounded by cables, computers, scanners, diagnostic carts, and increasingly frustrated people. Victoria stood beside the car reviewing another report. The lead technician shook his head. Again, no solution. The room felt heavier than it had the day before. Not because anyone doubted the team, because deadlines were approaching. That evening, Victoria was hosting one of the largest collector gatherings of the year. 30 guests, investors, collectors, potential business partners. The Ferrari was supposed to be the centerpiece, the vehicle everyone would gather around, the conversation piece, the statement. Instead, it sat silent, a monument to an unanswered question. Victoria checked the time, then looked back at the technicians. Nobody spoke. Nobody had anything new to offer. At that exact moment, Ethan Parker turned into the Harbor Avenue parking lot. The drive had been uneventful. 3 deliveries completed, 1 remaining. He parked beside the receiving entrance and checked the paperwork. Specialty components. Routine order. Nothing remarkable. He picked up the delivery box and walked toward the building. The receiving entrance should have been open. It wasn't. He tried the handle. Locked. He looked around. Nobody nearby. Then he heard it. An engine. Not running. Trying to run. The sound carried through the building. Most people would not have noticed anything unusual. Ethan did. He stopped walking. Listened. Something about the sound bothered him. Not dramatically. Just enough. The same way a musician notices a note slightly out of tune. The same way a painter notices a color slightly wrong. Experience creates sensitivities other people never develop. Ethan followed the sound through an open side corridor, past a storage area, toward the main workshop. The moment he stepped inside, he saw the Ferrari, and immediately recognized it. Not merely the model, the project, the architecture, the engine, the shape of the rear deck, the cooling layout, the placement of the hybrid systems. 15 years disappeared in an instant. For a moment he was standing in Italy again, standing beside prototype test vehicles, reviewing engineering reports, arguing over thermal management data, watching development teams fight impossible deadlines. The Ferrari in front of him was one of those vehicles brought to life, or rather, one of the descendants of those vehicles. He found himself walking closer, not consciously, the way people move toward something familiar, something connected to a different version of themselves. Around him, nobody paid attention. Technicians remained focused on diagnostics. Engineers remained focused on laptops. Victoria remained focused on reports. Ethan reached the car. He studied it quietly. The engine cover sat partially open. He looked inside. The layout was instantly recognizable. Some ideas never leave the people who create them. His hand rested lightly on the edge of the engine compartment. Not possessively, not carelessly, almost respectfully, like greeting an old friend. That was when Victoria looked up. She saw a man in delivery clothes standing beside a multi-million-dollar Ferrari. Touching it, her reaction happened instantly. The way reactions happen when stress, responsibility, and exhaustion all collide at the same moment. She crossed the workshop floor. Employees noticed. Technicians noticed. Conversations stopped. Victoria's voice carried through the building. Sharp, immediate, public, the kind of voice used by people accustomed to being obeyed. She demanded to know what he thought he was doing. Every eye in the workshop turned toward the delivery driver, toward the Ferrari, toward the confrontation forming beside it. Ethan looked at her calmly. The room waited, and in the next few seconds, the entire direction of the day was about to change. The workshop became very quiet. Not because anyone had been told to stop talking, because everybody sensed something important was happening. Victoria Sinclair stood beside the Ferrari. The delivery driver stood beside the engine bay. Technicians watched. Engineers watched. Office staff watched from the glass corridor overlooking the workshop floor. Nobody moved. Victoria looked directly at him. Her patience had already been consumed by 2 days of diagnostics, international technical support calls, conflicting reports, and a Ferrari that refused to cooperate. The last thing she needed was a delivery driver touching the most important vehicle in the building. Victoria asked him what he thought he was doing. The question landed sharply, directly, without softness. Ethan looked at her calmly. He removed his hand from the engine bay. No defensiveness, no irritation, just calm. The kind of calm that often irritated people who were expecting a different response. He explained that he had recognized something. Victoria folded her arms. Recognized what? The Ferrari. The answer produced several confused expressions around the workshop. Of course he recognized the Ferrari. Everybody recognized the Ferrari. That wasn't unusual. Victoria asked him what exactly he meant. Ethan looked at the engine again, then at her, then back at the engine. He said there was something familiar about it. The room remained silent. Victoria had heard enough. She told him to leave. Immediately, the delivery could be completed through receiving. The workshop was restricted. The Ferrari was not a tourist attraction. The statement drew several nods from employees. Reasonable, professional, expected, but Ethan didn't leave. Not immediately. He looked at the engine one more time. Then he asked a question. A simple question. Had anyone checked the thermal synchronization sequence between the hybrid control unit and the secondary combustion management controller? The room froze. The lead Ferrari specialist slowly looked up from his laptop. Then another technician. Then another, because that wasn't the kind of question random people asked. Victoria noticed it. She looked around the room. The reaction was immediate. Visible, several technicians were suddenly paying attention. One of the remote Ferrari engineers appeared on the large screen mounted near the diagnostic station. His expression changed. The question had gotten his attention too. Victoria looked back at Ethan. The calm delivery driver standing beside the Ferrari. She asked how he even knew those systems existed. Ethan answered honestly. Because he helped design them. Nobody said anything. The silence stretched. Then somebody laughed, one of the younger technicians. Not cruelly, not maliciously, the laugh people make when something sounds impossible. Several others smiled. Victoria did not. She simply stared at him. Then asked him to repeat what he had just said. Ethan repeated it. Exactly. He had helped design the engine architecture, the hybrid integration system, the thermal balancing strategy, the combustion synchronization logic, the entire powertrain concept. The room processed the statement, rejected it, then processed it again. Victoria looked at the delivery uniform, the work boots, the delivery box. Nothing about the man standing in front of her matched what he had just claimed. Victoria asked him what his name was. He told her. Several people typed it immediately into laptops, searching, verifying, trying to find evidence. The senior Ferrari engineer on the screen suddenly leaned forward. His face moved closer to the camera. Very close. Then he spoke for the first time since Ethan entered the workshop. He asked Ethan a question. A specific one. A technical question about a prototype cooling issue from 14 years earlier. The kind of issue that would never appear in public documentation. The kind of issue only somebody directly involved would know. The workshop listened. Ethan answered immediately. No hesitation. No thinking time. He described the problem. The failed solution. The successful solution. And the meeting where the decision was finalized. The Ferrari engineer stopped speaking. His expression changed completely. Then, he nodded. Slowly, the room noticed. So did Victoria. The engineer looked at the workshop staff, then looked directly at Victoria, and said something that instantly changed everything. He confirmed it. The man standing beside the Ferrari was exactly who he claimed to be. 15 years earlier, Ethan Parker had been one of the principal engineers behind the original engine development program. Several major systems inside the Ferrari existed because of decisions he had personally made. The workshop absorbed this information slowly, like people trying to adjust to a reality that had shifted without warning. Victoria felt the shift most of all, because 30 seconds earlier she had been preparing to throw him out. Now Ferrari's own senior engineering representative was confirming that the delivery driver standing beside the car had helped invent the machine everyone else had spent 2 days trying to understand. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody moved. Victoria looked at Ethan. Then at the Ferrari. Then back at Ethan. The pieces began rearranging themselves. The calm, the confidence, the lack of defensiveness, the way he had looked at the engine, the way he had asked questions instead of offering theories, the way he had immediately focused on the exact area where the diagnostics seemed trapped. Suddenly it all made sense. Victoria asked one question. If he helped design it, could he fix it? Ethan looked at the Ferrari. The answer arrived almost immediately. Yes, he probably could. Victoria asked how long. The workshop waited. Every technician, every engineer, every employee, even the Ferrari specialist on the screen. Ethan looked at the diagnostics, looked at the engine, then answered. 20 minutes. The workshop went silent again, because the manufacturer's team had spent 2 days on the problem, and the man she had just fired was offering 20 minutes. Victoria stared at him for several seconds, then stepped aside from the Ferrari. The gesture was small, but everyone understood what it meant. The workshop belonged to him now. At least for the next 20 minutes, and nobody in the room was going to stop him. Nobody left the workshop, not a single person. The technicians stayed. The Ferrari specialists stayed connected. Office staff found reasons to remain nearby. Even employees whose jobs had absolutely nothing to do with diagnostics somehow found themselves standing close enough to watch. Because everyone understood, they were witnessing something unusual. A problem that had defeated experts. A problem that had defeated Ferrari itself, and a delivery driver who claimed he could solve it in 20 minutes. Ethan Parker walked around the Ferrari slowly. Not dramatically. Not performing expertise. Simply observing. The way a person studies something familiar after years apart. Victoria noticed something immediately. He wasn't looking at the diagnostic equipment. He wasn't studying the fault codes. He wasn't reviewing reports. Instead, he was looking at the car itself. The physical machine. The way it sat. The way the systems interacted. The way everything connected. It was the difference between reading a description of a city and actually walking through its streets. Most people in the workshop knew the data. Ethan appeared to know the machine. After one slow circuit around the Ferrari, he stopped beside the rear engine compartment. Then he asked for a flashlight. One appeared immediately. Nobody wanted to waste time. He examined a specific section near the hybrid cooling assembly. 30 seconds. 45. 1 minute. Then he smiled. Not a large smile, just enough. The kind of smile people make when something finally makes sense. Victoria noticed it. So did everyone else. He asked for a mirror inspection tool. Again, somebody handed one over before he finished speaking. The workshop had become completely invested in whatever he was doing. He used the mirror, looked inside a narrow section of the engine bay, then nodded once. The senior Ferrari engineer on the screen leaned forward. Ethan pointed toward a hidden section beneath the cooling architecture, then asked a question. Had anyone physically inspected the secondary thermal synchronization sensor mount? Silence. The technicians looked at each other. One specialist checked the service records. Another reviewed inspection logs. Nobody answered immediately. Because nobody had. The component wasn't part of the standard diagnostic sequence. The system monitored itself electronically. If it failed, software usually detected it. Physical inspection was considered unnecessary. Ethan nodded, as though he expected that answer. Then he explained. 15 years earlier, during development testing, one prototype had produced a nearly identical fault pattern. Not identical. Close. Close enough. The issue had not been electronic, it had been mechanical. A mounting bracket. Tiny, almost insignificant. A vibration issue. At specific operating frequencies, the bracket allowed microscopic movement. That movement produced corrupted synchronization signals. The software interpreted those signals as system-wide failures. The result was chaos. Not real failures. False failures. The prototype engineers had spent 6 days chasing software problems before discovering a bracket smaller than a human hand was responsible. The room listened. Nobody interrupted. The story sounded absurd, which was exactly why it sounded believable. Complex failures often had complicated explanations, but the worst problems sometimes came from something nobody expected. Victoria looked at the Ferrari, then at Ethan, then at the Ferrari again. He asked for a socket wrench. A technician handed it to him immediately. Ethan removed 2 access panels. Carefully, methodically, the workshop watched. The Ferrari specialist on the screen watched. Even Victoria found herself holding her breath. A few moments later, Ethan reached into the compartment, adjusted his position, then stopped. His hand remained still. He had found something. The room sensed it immediately. Ethan slowly withdrew his hand. Between his fingers sat a small metal bracket, bent, slightly warped, almost invisible. Certainly not the kind of thing anyone would associate with 2 days of failed diagnostics, or international engineering consultations, or dozens of specialists. Yet there it was. The workshop stared. Ethan placed the bracket on a nearby workbench, then looked at the Ferrari engineer on the screen. The engineer looked at the bracket. His expression changed instantly. Recognition, immediate, complete. He knew exactly what he was looking at. The engineer leaned closer to the camera, then quietly confirmed it. The bracket. Version 3. Early production design. There had been concerns during development. Minor concerns, not enough to halt production, not enough to justify redesign costs. The issue had appeared in testing only twice, both times under unusual conditions. Neither time had resulted in a customer incident. Until now. The workshop became silent again. A different silence, the silence that comes when people realize they have been looking in entirely the wrong direction. Ethan asked for a replacement bracket. Nobody had one. Not surprising, the component wasn't expected to fail. Victoria asked how long it would take to source. The Ferrari engineer estimated several days, possibly longer. Victoria's expression darkened slightly. The client event was tomorrow. Several days might as well have been several months. Then Ethan asked another question. Did anyone have a fabrication bench? The workshop manager pointed toward one at the rear. Ethan walked over, picked up the damaged bracket, examined it, then began sketching dimensions onto a notepad. 10 minutes later, he had fabricated a temporary replacement. Nothing elegant, nothing beautiful, just functional, the way good engineering often is. He installed it, reassembled the access panels, then stepped back. A technician moved toward the driver's seat. The diagnostic system connected. The startup sequence began. Everyone watched. The screen populated. No faults. The hybrid system initialized. No faults. The thermal management system synchronized. No faults. The engine started. Perfect, clean, stable. The Ferrari idled exactly as it should. No warnings, no alerts, no fault codes, nothing. The workshop stood frozen. The problem was gone. 2 days. Multiple specialists, Ferrari engineers, thousands of pages of diagnostics, and the solution had been hiding behind a small metal bracket nobody thought to physically inspect. Victoria stared at the running Ferrari, then at Ethan, then back at the Ferrari. For several seconds she didn't speak, because there was only one question left, the question that had been growing larger with every passing minute. If this man had helped create the engine, if he could diagnose what nobody else could diagnose, if Ferrari itself still remembered him, why was he delivering parts for a living? Ethan removed the work gloves someone had handed him, set them on the bench, and looked exactly the same as he had when he walked through the door. Calm, unimpressed, completely indifferent to the fact that he had just solved a problem that had consumed one of the most expensive workshops in the country. Victoria looked at him carefully and realized she no longer wanted to know how he fixed the Ferrari. She wanted to know who he really was. Victoria invited Ethan to her office. Not the client lounge, not the glass conference room overlooking the workshop, her actual office. The room where decisions were made, the room nobody entered without a reason. Ethan followed her through the corridor, while the workshop behind them continued discussing the Ferrari. The story was already spreading through the building. The delivery driver, the Ferrari engineer, the man who fixed in 20 minutes what specialists couldn't solve in 2 days. By lunchtime, everyone would know. Victoria closed the office door. She offered coffee. Ethan accepted. She poured 2 cups, then sat across from him. For several moments neither spoke. The Ferrari was fixed. The crisis was over. The client event was saved. Yet somehow that no longer felt like the most important thing that had happened that morning. Victoria looked at him, then asked the question she had been carrying around since the workshop. Why did he leave? Ethan already knew what she meant. Why leave Ferrari? Why leave engineering? Why leave a career most engineers spent their entire lives trying to reach? He looked at the coffee, then out the window. For a moment it seemed like he might not answer. Then he did. 15 years earlier, he had been exactly where people expected him to be. Senior engineering leadership, international projects, prototype programs, development teams. The future looked predictable. Bigger projects, bigger responsibilities, more recognition. Then his wife became sick. At first, the illness looked manageable. Then it wasn't. Hospitals replaced boardrooms. Appointments replaced engineering meetings. Priorities changed. The kind of change that happens slowly until one day you realize your entire life has become something different. For 3 years he balanced both worlds. Engineering during the day, hospitals at night. Then came a point where balancing stopped being possible. His daughter was 7. His wife needed him. The work needed someone who could give it everything. And he couldn't. Not anymore. So he left. Not dramatically. No argument. No scandal. No public announcement. He simply stepped away, stayed home, took care of his family. His wife died 18 months later. Victoria listened without interruption. Ethan continued. Afterward, there had been decisions. Practical ones. A child to raise. Bills to pay. A future to build from whatever remained. The repair shop came first. The delivery work came later. Not because it was his dream. Because it worked. It kept the lights on. It kept stability where stability was needed. And over time he discovered something surprising. He liked it. Not the prestige, not the recognition, the work itself. Helping people. Solving problems, going home at night, knowing something broken, that morning wasn't broken anymore. Victoria sat quietly. The story explained everything. The calm. The lack of ego. The complete absence of bitterness. He wasn't a man who had lost something. He was a man who had chosen something. There was a difference, a very important difference. Victoria looked at him. Then she made her proposal. Directly, the way she handled every important conversation. She wanted him as a consultant, not an employee. Not a manager, not another executive. Something more valuable. A technical advisor, available whenever her team reached a dead end. Someone who could look at a problem differently. Someone who understood machines from the inside rather than from documentation. Someone who remembered how they had been created. The compensation was substantial. The flexibility was complete. The schedule would work around his repair shop. His daughter remained the priority. Victoria made that clear immediately. Ethan listened. Read the proposal. Read it a second time. Then placed it on the desk. Victoria waited. Eventually he nodded. Then said he had one condition. Victoria smiled slightly. She was beginning to expect conditions from the people worth listening to. She asked what it was. Ethan told her. An apprenticeship program. 2 positions every year. Young people. Not necessarily engineering graduates. Not necessarily university students. Just people with curiosity. People willing to learn. People who deserved an opportunity they otherwise wouldn't receive. Real training. Real responsibility. Real mentorship. Victoria listened. Then asked why. Ethan leaned back slightly. Because knowledge disappears when people keep it. His father had taught him that. His father had been a mechanic. Nothing glamorous. No awards. No titles. Just a man who believed useful knowledge was supposed to move forward instead of stopping with one person. When Ethan was young, his father taught him everything he knew. Not because he had to, because somebody once taught him. And somebody before that. Knowledge moved. That was how it survived. Ethan looked out the office window toward the workshop. The Ferrari sat under the lights. Perfect now. Running, a live A machine created by thousands of decisions, made by thousands of people, most of whose names nobody would ever know. That seemed important somehow. Victoria understood. Immediately, 2 apprentice positions. Every year, she agreed without negotiation. They shook hands. The agreement was complete. By 3:15, Ethan was picking up his daughter from school. She climbed into the truck, fastened her seatbelt, then performed the same 3-second inspection she always performed whenever he picked her up. His expression told her something interesting had happened. She noticed immediately. Daughters often do. She asked if the fancy Ferrari place had gone well. Ethan said yes. Very well. She asked if he fixed something. He said yes. She opened her notebook. Ready. The story unfolded during the drive home. The Ferrari. The specialists. The firing. The engine. The workshop. The repair. The offer. Everything. She listened carefully. When he finished, she thought about it for almost an entire traffic light. Then asked one question. The question children ask when adults think the story is already over. Did they know who you were before today? Ethan smiled. No, they didn't. She nodded, then wrote something. Several minutes later, she showed him the notebook. He glanced at the page, then laughed softly. The sentence read, "The engine knew who he was. The people didn't." Ethan looked at the words, then looked back at the road. His daughter continued writing in the notebook, the same notebook she had carried for years, recording observations, questions, moments that mattered. The workshop would remember the Ferrari. The specialists would remember the diagnosis. Victoria would remember the lesson. But Ethan suspected that years later, the thing he would remember most from that day was a single sentence written by a child sitting beside him in a pickup truck on the drive home. The engine knew who he was. The people didn't. And somehow, that explained the entire story. 8 weeks after the Ferrari incident, the first 2 apprentices arrived at Sinclair Automotive Group. Ethan's training program started exactly the way he promised it would. Not with software. Not with diagnostic scanners. Not with engineering theory. The first lesson was simpler than that. He opened an engine bay and asked them one question. What is the simplest thing that could be wrong? The second lesson came after. And the third. By the end of their first month, both apprentices had already prevented mistakes that would have cost thousands of dollars, because they learned something most technicians forget once they become experts. Look first. Assume nothing. And never confuse complexity with importance. If this story reached you today, subscribe now and share it with someone who needs the reminder. New story every single week.